Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&A. Just a reminder, if anybody's around this weekend, I will be doing a panel at the Uplink Festival, or Expo, or whatever you want to call it. It's the Long Island Retro Gaming Expo's online version of it for this year. I'm doing a panel both on Saturday, and we're doing the Retro Roundtable on Sunday. So if you're around, if you're already getting a ticket anyway, definitely check that out. And, if you weren't already buying a ticket, maybe check out the other list of panels and stuff like that and see if it's all worth it to you. If not, I totally get it. It's rough times for some people, so my sympathies are with you. I've been there many times in my life, so no, if you can't do it, absolutely, totally get it. So anyway, let's jump into the Q&As. First up is a question from Rolf. So I'm so sorry, I never get the names right. Please correct me, and I do try to get them right. But they have a consumer-grade CRT with component video inputs, and they're looking to do two things. They're looking to play Smash on it from a GameCube, and they're also looking to use emulation, and they're wondering if CRT EmuDriver or GBS control with downscaling might be the best option for that. So there's two answers to this. So first of all, for playing GameCube, if you're a Smash player and you play competitively, then just use composite video into this TV. It'll be zero lag. If it's got, I guess if you have the component cables or you have an S-video cable, that's totally fine too. But the only point I'm trying to make in Smash is, why not just remove anything from the back of your head in downscaling, or what if there's lag? Remove the emotion from it altogether and just leave the science. Any analog signal going in, composite, S-video, RGB, component, whatever, any analog signal going directly into that is going to be zero lag added at all. The CRT isn't going to add any lag. The signal doesn't have any lag. All analog signals. I've had Smash players tell me RGB adds lag before. Somebody really needs to do a better job educating them on that. All analog outputs, zero lag. So for Smash, I would just stick with it that way. And sure, it's going to be in 480i, but if the flicker bothers you, you could always use Swiss to downscale to 240p, and it'll change the look, but there won't be any flicker. It'll be nice, progressive scan, but all zero lag. So that's how I would handle Smash. For the emulation stuff, though, you asked about CRT EmuDriver versus using GBS control. Now, I think there's two different ways to go about doing this. If you're building a dedicated emulation PC that is only going to be used for emulation and nothing else, maybe get an older graphics card that's compatible, something for $20, or maybe just spend the $80 or $100 on an arcade VGA card that you don't need any hacking. You just install the drivers, and then after everything's installed, when you reboot, it just boots in 240p. So in that case, you'd want to, get everything else set up first, and then get the driver installed. But then you have a dedicated box that's always 15 kilohertz no matter what. On the other side of that, if you have a computer that's multi-use, I know a lot of people that use laptops with VGA outputs for stuff like this. All you have to do is go in the settings and manually change it to 640 by 480. Sometimes you got to dig in there depending on your version of Windows and the graphics card, but it should always be easy to get that resolution out. And once you've done that, stick it into the GBS controls VGA input, and then have component video output and downscale to 15 kilohertz that way. And that's a perfectly good way to do it. Now, there is the 8 milliseconds of lag, but in all testing I've done, including the testing that Brian from RetroUSB did on professional Tetris players, anything over 8 milliseconds, people started to have trouble with their moves on older zero frame buffer consoles, but 8 milliseconds and lower, it's really not a big deal. But if you're using software emulation, there's going to be much wider of a swing of emulation lag no matter what. So I would think that using GBS control to downscale is absolutely a perfectly good solution for that. I would never even think about it. I would completely try to get it out of your mind that there's any lag at all, because I don't think that's going to be an issue in your setup. And if you did have any problems with lag, it would have to do with the emulation, the software emulation, not the downscaling of that. And it's also my opinion that if you have the ability to build your own GBS control, that's something that if you're a tinkerer, you should have that tool in your toolbox. Even if you end up only taking it out once or twice a year, when you do, you're going to go, wow, I'm so glad I had this thing. So, hopefully that's a decent explanation of all your questions. But yeah, I would just plug plug your GameCube directly into the CRT. Just use Composite or something, to save cache. I'm sure you already have one of those cables laying around. And I would just decide dedicated emulation box or multi-use computer. But even if you do have a dedicated box, GBS control is still a great solution, just for ease, like one less thing in the chain. But I guess if you were using, just a quick addendum, I guess if you were using any of those, you would still need to use the GBS scaler anyway, because you would want to convert VGA to component video. So at that point, I guess I would just use any PC and use it as a downscaler and just have that taken care of for you. But hopefully that still get everything into perspective. Next, IB Bangin' wanted to follow up about the PVM with that extra input. Also, thanks for your patience with the social media rant there. But so it looks like it's just a simple video connector from older PCs. So a CGA RGB input, if you will. And if that's what this is, you should be able to just get a VGA to CGA dongle that allows you to plug a VGA cable into it. However, it's still going to require a 15 kilohertz signal. That does not mean that you could use a 640 by 480, 480 progressive signal on here, 31 kilohertz. So you might be able to do something like have some kind of conversion, use it for old PCs, try to use it as another input. But to be honest, unless you are specifically using it for old PCs, I don't know if it's really worth the trouble to mess around with when you already have perfectly good RGBS inputs here. And if you need more than one input, you could grab a switch. However, if you did have old PCs, like I had a Tandy 1000 that used the same connector, you should be able to use it. And the digital RGB, digital should just mean that the sync is TTL level. I tried to go through the manual, and it also referred to colors being TTL level. I'm not really sure how that works in conjunction with old PCs. I just think that if you had, like my old Tandy 1000, there was a whole bunch of computers with that style connector on it. I think you could use that as a monitor for those and not worry. But I wouldn't really mess with it for retro gaming. I mean, you could try. It shouldn't hurt anything at all. Putting, a standard RGB HV 15 kilohertz signal, the worst that could happen should be nothing, which is fine. I just, it seems like a lot of effort for something that might not fit your needs, unless of course you have those old computers, and then this might be an awesome choice. But I'll keep my eyes open for the same exact model monitor just in case. It's the PVM 1342Q. And if I run across one of these, I'll pick it up and see if I could find an old computer to test it on, just for the heck of it, just because I'm curious about this stuff. But thanks for the pick, and thanks for following up. Over on Patreon now, and I'm going to go from the bottom up because it's Patreon's app doesn't seem to be working right at the moment, and this is all I could do. So hopefully by the time this is done, I'll be able to see all of the comments. Anyway, Jason Guffey said they recently picked up a Sega Genesis Model 1 from a garage sale. It's their first experience actually owning a Sega console, so they're pretty excited to reach across the divide and finally see what the hype's about. However, they can't get any picture or sound out of the system. When they power it on, the red LED is lit, and they get a brief audio hum from the speakers, but no picture or sound. They've tried a few different games and opened up the console. It was in pretty good shape with hardly no dust and signs of leaking caps or corrosion. However, the system did come with one of those off-brand power adapters that's also compatible with the SNES. Perhaps this is the issue. So, in all honesty, that would be the first thing that I did. In fact, I don't mean to be silly, and I certainly don't mean to, cause an issue here, but I would throw that directly in the garbage. The power supply, not the console. Those do more damage than anything else. I wouldn't trust it. I would go and pick up a Triad power supply. Just check the links on Firebrand X's website. I use those for testing. I've had excellent luck, and I have double-checked in a lot of the tests that I did, especially when I first got it, doing these tests with the original OEM PSU with a brand new high-end capacitor in it versus a Triad, and I never saw a difference. And these are in pretty in-depth tests, and I believe the MD4EA team probably came up with the same conclusion as well. So that would be my first thing. The next would be to clean out the cartridge slot really well. An old cotton shirt with some isopropyl over like a credit card's, how I used to do it. If you could find something thinner than a credit card, like an Amazon gift card or something, those are also pretty good. Definitely clean those out and hit it with compressed air inside of that as well as you can. And then you kind of are going to have to go from there. But those are the two things that I would absolutely check. And then past that, it could be chips. It could be, it could be a lot of different things involved in that. So yeah, just as a general rule, don't ever trust those OEM power supply or those non-OEM power supplies. I'm sure there's some out there that are perfectly fine to use, but they're so hard to determine what's what. I would just either use the original and rebuild it if you need to, or just pick up one of the ones that we've tested, and hopefully we'll continue to test to make sure that they're consistent in their quality. Also, they're curious what games I recommend. There's others out there like Metal Jesus that have lists, and I've seen those, but they're curious what I've got. Definitely the Sonic games. I mean, you gotta have to play the classics like that just to really experience what the hype from the console was all about. But yeah, I would definitely go to one of those channels that has really good in-depth hidden gems, if you will, that kind of goes in and talks about different games. I know GameSack does that with a bunch of different consoles and stuff like that. So I would just kind of start with those and go from there, because that's certainly not the experience you could have gotten. The Sonic games, you couldn't have gotten that exact experience on any other console of the era. And, depending how much time you have, if you don't have that much time, start with Sonic 3, because you could save after every level. If you do have the time, I would just start from the beginning and just kind of experience the Sonic trilogy, or quadrilogy if you count Sonic and Knuckles too. I do like that game as well. Lastly, why is the front headphone jack the only source of stereo audio? No one knows for sure, but my personal guess is that when the Genesis came out, most people were still using RF. And composite video wasn't even something that your average person would use. They just screwed on the RF terminal, and they added the front headphone jack just as a way of saying, Nintendo's only mono and we're stereo, so throw on your Sony headphones with those squishy little pads on the side that they had in the 80s and, enjoy these awesome sounds. And I think it was just the fact that most people used RF at that time, and the headphone jack was probably just more of a marketing gimmick. But I certainly used it as a kid. That's how I was able to play games late at night without getting caught. So anyway, good questions. Hopefully I kind of steered you in the right direction. Conrad Klaus wants to know if I know of a site that might be keeping track of lag results for flat screens. I know the TCL4 series had great reviews for retro gaming, but those are getting hard to come by. It looks like I'm finally in the market to upgrade my TV, but I'm not sure where to go. Any idea if the 5 or 6 series have similar results to the 4? So a few different answers. I believe the newer ones are just as good in the lag and the compatibility. Rtings, R-T-I-N-G-S, rtings.com usually lists lag tests there. I have a spreadsheet that I've been keeping on the website as well. It's more, the one that I listed is more just for fellow retro nerds that want to say, here's what I've tested, here's compatibility, kind of in the context of what we do. Maybe someday Rtings might even realize that the retro gaming market's growing pretty big and would do things like test OSSC compatibility or something like that. But I would check with those, and I'm pretty sure the new ones are good too, and the new LGs are also really good as well. So it's just a matter of Digital Foundry did a video a couple months ago about the best TVs that they've seen for 2020, from the affordable series all the way up to like the best of the best. So you might want to watch that one just to make sure you're buying the one that fits your needs the best. But it's a good TV. So, if you've already bought it, just, know that you got a good TV, and it's totally fine. Firebrand X wants me to give my honest and complete thoughts on the Analogue Pocket pre-order pandemic. How can I put this as politely as I possibly can? That's exactly what they wanted to happen. That was planned, and that was all the dominoes falling the way that they had wanted it to. So I wouldn't even be surprised if that famous person who tweeted about it was part of the plan. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. Otherwise, I'm going to get myself in trouble. Conrad Klaus also wants to know if I know anything about the XStation and if I know how the installation's going to be. Respectfully, I don't know what I'm allowed to talk about with this or not, so I'm just going to have to do that really shitty thing and say, stay tuned. I'll have more info on it fairly soon. I know that sucks. I know people, especially because the pictures are already out there. I have a feeling this one's going to be awesome. So I think I'll just leave it at that, and I'll get you all more details as soon as I can. I promise. Focus is still thinking about installing a virtual tap video out kit into a Virtual Boy and using a Nintendo AV multi-out to get RGB output from it. And respectfully, I believe you're confusing resistors and capacitors. So in an NTSC signal on a Super Nintendo, in the cable has three capacitors on the RG and B lines, as well as I believe a capacitor and a resistor on the sync line. So if you're going to have this kit installed that has a board that has all the components already on it, you're going to have to make sure that you're not doubling up on components. Now, it's not going to hurt anything, but it just might not work at all. So if you have, double capacitors, double resistors, you don't have to worry about blowing stuff out. But I think what you're going to have to worry about is on the RGB lines, are there capacitors on that virtual tap board? And if there are, you might have to remove them. If not, just try using it anyway and see what happens. If you're in PAL land, which I don't think you are, but if you are, you then the cable that you have has the 75 ohm resistors in there, and you might need to look at it completely different. So what I would really strongly suggest is contact people who have done a bunch of these virtual tap mods and see what they've come up with, and just kind of follow their lead. But at the very least, the problem that you have is a good one, in that if you install all of this together, you wire up the multi-out, you plug in the cable, the worst thing that could happen is nothing. Whereas it would be the opposite in other scenarios where if you used a pass-through cable, you could be sending too much voltage or something. That's not the case in this one. So I would contact people that have done it. Take a look on Twitter. I know you're pretty active on Twitter, so just find other modders that have already done this before, kind of follow their lead and go for that. But I think in your question here, I don't want to read it because I don't want to confuse everybody, no offense or anything, but you were talking about resistors when the problem might actually be the capacitors in this case, if there's even a problem at all. So I would just kind of follow people's lead on this. 2 questions from Normal Guy. First, any news at all on high def NES or Ultra HDMI? No, 0. I'm sorry. There might be something, but I haven't heard it personally. Also, they want to know if there's any info on an Atari Jaguar Toastlink mod. I would try to check the Atari Age forums for that, and just kind of see if there's any info on there as well. I remember sort of seeing something about that at some point, but I never tried it myself. So yeah, I would just kind of search through, and if it's not on there, maybe we could kind of figure it out and reproduce it at some point. Obed Samuel said, someone asked about an ultrasonic cleaner last week, and they just wanted to share their experience with theirs. First thing they would say is they're generally very expensive. For most home consoles, can cost upwards of €200, although you might find one cheaper on AliExpress or something. Secondly, the cleaner is only as good as the solution you use, and that, along with deionized water, can further increase the costs. The question I would ask is, how often do you intend to use it? I mod as a hobby and maybe go through 4 circuit boards a month. I have to say, as a cleaner, it truly is exceptional. No amount of hand scrubbing will ever clean the board that well, and the time saved soon adds up. But if you only need it for, say, a small personal collection, I'm not sure it would be worth it unless you have money to spare and desperately want that new look. Also, be sure to read the guidance on cleaning PCBs, as it's not recommended to leave them in there too long, especially if they're moving parts on the circuit board. As a side, I've just got into sour beers. Not sure if you can get them over the pond, but keep an eye out for them. You'll typically find them in the UK at a microbrewery or somewhere that has a wide selection of beers. So I'll talk about the beer part first because that's easier. I always keep an open mind. I will try anything that people recommend, but I like the sour beers less on the scale of what beers that I drink. But if you have a brand that you really like, I'll keep my eye open for it and see if I could find a place around here that has a wide selection that maybe I could just go and have one and kind of see what I think. So thanks for the suggestion. As for the ultrasonic cleaner, that's some awesome feedback. To be honest, now, if I had a real people-sized apartment or a place, you're making me want to buy one now, because that's the type of thing that I would probably use on a regular basis between myself and my friends and everybody I know that constantly mods these things. And one of the solutions that we talked about a long time ago, which is kind of a ghetto solution, I know, but we were going to get an old dishwasher, one of the small apartment-sized ones that I have that's like half the size of a normal one, and then get distilled water and run it, run a couple cycles with just distilled water and use that to clean boards. But there's still so much I don't like about that, and so much that can go wrong. Certainly, it's certainly more risky than doing what I do now, and then just basically dousing the board in isopropyl, scrubbing it with an electronics brush, tapping it out, hitting it with compressed air, and then when I say leave it in the sun, I don't mean like leave it to bake in the sun for days. That can't be good for circuit boards, but I do leave it in the sun for a couple of minutes on each side, especially in the summer, like only a few minutes, just so the UV rays could kind of dry out anything. But what you described sounds way better. The only other thing I would ask is that when you take it out of the deionized water, is there anything else you do with it? Do you leave it in like a UV chamber or something to, like what people were using for retro brighting consoles? Do you leave it in something like that just to make sure that it gets all of the moisture out, or because it's deionized water, no impure particles in there, is it cool to just kind of like hit it with compressed air and then just prop it up on a desk to dry out overnight or something like that? So thanks very much for chiming in. That's some really cool info. The Remora had an interesting question. So they're trying to pick up a switch to use with an OSSC and connect all of their consoles in mixed resolution, so 480p and 15 kilohertz to 40p and 480i. And they said that they heard a lot of Capcom games on the Dreamcast don't support RGB. So in the scenario that you're talking about, I believe that some of the Capcom games that don't support RGB do support VGA. And the ones that don't really support either, a lot of them could be forced into 480p mode. And I think there's really only one or two out there that can only be used with like composite video per se. So if that's the case, I would just get, since you're going to be using an OSSC, I would just pick up from either cable seller one of the Dreamcast SCART cables that have a switch between 15 and 31 kilohertz. And with that, you should be able to play almost the entire library. And just sometimes you might have 240p upscaled, and sometimes you might have 480p upscaled. But with all of that, you should be able to play everything except the handful of games that are composite video only. And I think even one of those has a patch to it or something. I remembered all of this when I was doing the Dreamcast video, and then I kind of forgot all of it. So sorry about that. But yeah, I would just pick up the SCART cable and you should be able to take care of everything you need for Dreamcast. For PS2, I would either would be fine. I would probably just pick up the HD Retrovision cables, not the conversion ones, just the basic pass-through component video ones. For PS1, SCART cable's fine. So, I would just kind of make sure you get the right cable for each console and not really worry about Dreamcast, because it's also, there's no solution for using the higher quality outputs. So I would just kind of have to deal with that as you go. And also, thanks for the kind words about the support stuff. Much appreciated. Darkstar7 said, regarding the Dreamcast and the resets, this could happen even with the official GDEMU and is tied to the power supply. So, I guess I do still need to do a recap on my PSU. That's without a doubt. But when I was messing around with it for the mode video, all I did was take out the GDEMU and then reseat it, make sure it was tied down pretty good, and it's been working since. So I don't know. I don't really know yet, but I plan on recapping the PSU anyway, and I haven't used it much. Actually, I haven't used it at all since the mode video, so I guess I should just pay attention. Maybe I should just set it up on a table and power it on once a day to see if the reboot thing happens. And if it does, then recap the power supply right afterwards, and then kind of continue the test. But thanks for the info. Louis Cesaran said, to the guy last week asking how to play modern games via composite, I use a hacked PS3, then play 4x3 movies with the Movie In Media Player. Works great, and you could play most PS3 content in 4x3 also. Only downside to PS3 is it physically can't do 240p, only 480i. So thanks for that, Louis. I have a question for you then, if you're already doing this stuff. Or anybody, I guess. Does anybody know how to install the Hulu app on a jailbroken PS3 where you wouldn't want to log into the PSN account. There was a version of the package that supposedly hacked out the requirement of being logged into PSN, but I pay for Hulu, and I have a PlayStation, or I have had the PlayStation Network, but I need to keep this jailbroken for all the testing that I do. So, but I also wanted to do pretty much the same thing. I wanted to watch a couple TV shows off of Hulu in 480i on a CRT for an experiment that I'm doing. So if anybody knows anything on that, please message me. I would certainly, or I guess comment, and I'll certainly take a look and see what I could do. But the movie and media player is definitely something I'll look into as well, because just the native playback for PS3 is pretty terrible. So, the ability to just throw something on a USB stick and play it would be pretty awesome. So thanks for chiming in. Rob R. also wanted to chime in about Dreamcast troubles. Thanks, everybody, by the way. It's really appreciated, because some of these things that people are saying I hadn't heard of before, like this one. Rob's system would work fine during boot up and for about 20 minutes or so of playing, and then just stop working. The fan was blowing fine at first, so they thought maybe that wasn't enough to keep everything cool. Eventually, they found an Amazon review on the clone GDEMU that pointed them in the right direction to fix it. The power supply pins that connect to the PSU, either Pico or stock, should also be cleaned with some steel wool or Barkeeper's Friend. I guess that's kind of like Brasso, but anyway, after that, the system ran great with a clone GDEMU. So yeah, it is kind of like putting Brasso on carts, but it's not nearly as dangerous, because you're just trying to get the corrosion off the pins. I probably wouldn't do it. I'd probably use some steel wool or scuff it up a little bit. But that's interesting. I hadn't even thought of that. Maybe oxidation on the power supply pins or something like that. To be honest, for something like that, removing and plugging the power supply in very carefully, but doing that a couple of times might just accomplish the same thing. Certainly in my experience of just, the friction of rubbing the metal against the metal might just be enough to scuff it up. I don't know if I would need steel wool, but it's still a good suggestion and something I would certainly try on my console if I'm still having issues. Bradley says we have many options now for high quality, properly built RGB and component cables, but if you want a composite or S-video cable, you're left with very few options that mostly lack quality or are built wrong, like some of those composite cables for the Genesis that use the wrong pins for stereo audio. They had trouble finding a decent S-video cable for the Dreamcast, and eventually found an old third-party cable that was decent, but not that great. Why do you think we lack good options for composite and S-video cables? Do you think there's a market for good quality composite and S-video cables? It just seems odd that they're not available, given how common these connectors are on our CRTs. So, my guess would be the reason we don't see choices for high quality composite cables are you could buy a Genesis 2 composite cable for 99 cents from AliExpress, and your average person who's probably using composite might think, it's composite, who cares if the quality is good or not? I'm just going to be, using it temporarily or using it on this old beat up CRT. And I don't really agree with that. I've been annoyingly talking lately about how much I've always liked composite video on a CRT, just not directly going into a flat panel. And I do think that there is a market for it. And I actually think that one of the more important reasons for it is audio. So let's say you have a full RGB setup, right? And you have it going through an OSSC, and you're one of those crazy people like me that always has the profiles set up so it's as sharp as humanly possible. Can't walk near it or it'll sharpen, so sharp it'll cut your eyes, and you have everything hooked up to a stereo, but you want to play some light gun games, or sometimes you just want to use a CRT and enjoy it that way. So you grab your set of composite video cables, and while, maybe it's as good as you can get for composite, maybe it's kind of whatever, but, you're on your consumer grade CRT, maybe it's on a wheel rack like mine, you wheel it over, and then you plug those left and right audio connectors into your stereo. And now if you have that 99-cent cable, it's going to sound like garbage. There's going to be a loud buzz in there. It might not even be stereo. It might just be mono or something like that. So it's, there's absolutely a need for stuff like that. At the moment, I think the only place you can get things like that are from Retro Access's custom cable builder. They've definitely done S-Video before, and I believe they'll do composite as well. You just got to tell them what you want, and they'll make it for you. Those are not cheap, but that's exactly what you would want as a higher quality solution for that. I do hope other companies kind of at least consider making that. But at least for people that have full RGB setups that also want composite options, there's a few different devices coming out that do RGB to composite video conversion. I'm having one sent to me now. One is already here, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We're kind of working through the kinks on that. But that would be a great scenario in which you have your RGB SCART switch or something, and you plug one of these things into it, and then you just use like an HD RetroVision RCA cable, just a basic pass-through cable to connect composite and audio over to your stereo and your consumer grade TV or something. So that would certainly be good, but that's only a solution for people that already have RGB setups that also want composite as the option. That's not a good solution for people that just want to use their original cable or consoles with the original cables. Luckily, the Nintendo consoles, those composite cables seem to be plentiful out there. Not so much for the Sega stuff, especially Dreamcast and Saturn. So at the moment, my only suggestion would be try the custom cable builder for retro access. But yeah, I do hope somebody steps up to the plate and makes them. I just, everybody's going to understand they're going to be expensive because good cables cost money. So, I certainly wouldn't expect them to make a run of 1,000 because they probably wouldn't sell. But small quantity, high cost cables, I hope somebody at least steps up and tries to make them. Outer Zevin has 3 questions. First, they recently got a DataPath Vision E1S based on the suggestions from the videos. They've used VCS to get optimal timings keyed in for most retro progressive outputs, but haven't touched the interlaced stuff yet. I hear it's a little messier on that end. Any advice? None. I've never gotten interlaced signals 480i to work perfectly through the E1S, E2S, any of that stuff. I got lazy because I have a Epiphan DVI to USB 3.0 that works perfect with 480i signals. So whenever I need interlaced, I just use that. And that's only out of laziness. If I didn't have that, I probably would have dived deep into the problem to try to fix it. So my apologies. I guess I would just try to maybe check out the R3 Discord and see if anybody there has made some progress. But I have no clue how to approach that because I just, I skip over the issue when I need to. Question 2, to that end, what is your setup to capture 480i from the PS2? All right. Do you use the DataPath card? If so, what settings do you use? Okay, so I just answered that. I just go directly into the Epiphan card. Or I'll do something like, if I want to cheap out and not have to figure out optimal timings and not have to deal with phase, it's really a cheesy way to do it, but I'll just go into one of those quality component video to HDMI converters, which passes through 480i, and then I'll hook that up to the Epiphan card. And it's not going to be as sharp because the phase isn't set, but it tends to be good enough, not an embarrassing capture for me. And lastly, what's the best solution for capturing games that switch resolutions with this card? Is there even a good solution? The best solution is to use a scaler that doesn't have much lag. So the GBS control, excellent for this. The RetroTink products are generally pretty fast, but there is no solution yet. There's just a better way to handle it. So the OSSC Pro, that should have a mode that allows for a frame buffer that might have half a frame of lag or a frame of lag, and not in all modes, just in this mode, but that would buffer it so there is no signal drop when switching resolutions. So that would be probably the number one way to do that. And, of course, if you're talking about PlayStation 1, check out the new PS1 Digital. I'm going to be doing a video on that. I'm going to be testing resolution switching, and hopefully that'll be just as quick as well. So all great questions. Sorry, my answers to those were mostly cheesy and not exactly what you were hoping for, but it's just kind of how I do things in my setup chain. 3 from Clint Collage. First, would you have a suggestion for a high-quality shielded VGA cable? Yes, I linked to one in the Amazon store link. Just please keep in mind that anytime you buy stuff like this, maybe they make them in runs of 1,000 or 5,000, and when they run out, they label them the same, but they're not the quality. So, not the same quality. So the one I have, Steve from HD RetroVision bought 2 of, cut one of them apart, it looked great, tested the other one, works fine. I bought a couple of those, and it's worked great for me as well. So, and if it doesn't work well for you, please let me know and I'll remove the link. But so far, so good for that one. So question 2, you had a passive HV sync combiner in one of your recent videos. You hinted that may get made by someone into a more formal product. Have you heard more if that's the case? It's all still being worked out, and there's a few products like that are being worked out. The one that I'm most excited about is kind of on pause because we're also trying to solve the sync combining thing for those BVMs that are very sensitive to sync. So one of those will be out hopefully by the end of the year, and the moment it is, I'll post about it. But it's coming. It's just, respectfully, I think one of the reasons it's going a little slower is because it's less of a priority to everybody working on it than a lot of the other really amazing stuff that they're working on. So that certainly wasn't a dig against anybody developing these things. It's just kind of the way it is. Also, would that work for converting a VGA cable to SCART for input into a G-SCART switch using RGBS, so I wouldn't need to use the VGA input on my OSSC at all? Absolutely. Clint said they're looking to integrate this with their fully auto switching setup without needing to switch the input on my OSSC if possible. Yeah, 100%. That's another reason why we're looking to do stuff like this, because many people have the same setup as you. Automatic switch like the G-SCART into an OSSC that could handle multiple resolutions. So it doesn't really matter if the SCART standard had 480p or not. You want to get those signals through it so you have a fully automated setup. And yes, that's exactly what those sync combiners would be designed for. Last question, would this passive sync combiner solve the odd sync issue with the Taito F3 that requires the VGA hat for the home arcade system since the OSSC doesn't like that sync natively? There's a mod for the OSSC that allows it to work, but a cable side solution would be much better. I'd prefer not to mess with my OSSC. So that's one of the things that we're looking into. I think the BVM problem is priority 1 because that affects the most amount of people, because there's more people with those BVMs than there are with the Taito F3. And if that works, then I'm going to immediately, I believe Beast has one, so I'm going to immediately head to his house and try that with the Taito board and see if it fixes that as well. And if it doesn't, we're going to look into what that's like. How do we fix that? Is that something that could be implemented as well? Is there no way at all to fix it? So it is absolutely on the list. It's just one below the priority line of fixing BVM sync style stuff. So all awesome questions. The people I know that are all working on this are all aware of all that stuff. It's just going to take a little while longer, and I'm really hoping the product that I've been working on is going to be out by the end of the year because it'll solve like 10 different problems, including this, all in one box. So fingers crossed for this, but a lot of these developers that are much, much smarter than me have way more important things to work on. So I'm always trying to be very patient and not be an annoying pest because I do understand that. Also, devices like this, while they're gold to you and me, a lot of other people in retro gaming would never have the need for them. So they're going to be low quantity selling items. So I totally understand why they're not high on everybody's priority list, but I promise we're on it. Well, that's it for this week. I'm glad I got through the Patreon questions. I don't know if anybody watching on video noticed, but I wasn't able to refresh the page to get to all the comments until the end. Luckily, I just walked away and came back later and it worked. That's why it was cloudy before and really sunny now. But yeah, anyway, if that ever happens again, I'll just have to publish the Q&As as is and get back to those questions the following week. I hope that never happens again, but you know how it is sometimes. Also, if anybody is new to these Q&As, ask any question you have about anything wherever it is that you support. While I do spend an unhealthy amount of time responding to comments on Twitter and YouTube and everywhere else, these are really a thank you and a direct interaction with everybody that supports. So no disrespect to anybody else, but this is really just a thank you to all supporters, and I don't really read the YouTube comments of these, only just the comments inside the support services. Also, the way all of these services work, I can't just refresh to the newest comment, so please just make sure that you post all of your questions wherever the newest support Q&A is. Otherwise, I would just miss it. And if for whatever reason I do miss it, it's a total mistake. Just please ask the question again the following week or something. Sometimes I accidentally delete them in post. Sometimes I just make a mistake. So anyway, as always, thank you all so much for all your support. Without your help, none of these videos, the behind the scenes research, or any of the crazy stuff I'm involved with would happen. So thank you all so much, and I'll see you next week.